Have you ever wondered what it really means to live with someone who seems just a little too intense? Not the kind of intensity that excites or inspires, but the kind that quietly tightens the grip on your life until you barely recognize the space around you. I never thought my younger sister's boyfriend was dangerous. She always described him as intense or overprotective, sometimes a little too watchful, but harmless. That's what she told me, and I wanted to believe it. From the moment he started showing up at our house unannounced, there was a weight in the air no one could quite put a finger on. He wasn't just visiting. He was present in a way that felt invasive, like he was marking territory. He'd watch everyone closely, his eyes scanning the room, always alert, as if waiting for something to happen. It wasn't just ordinary protectiveness. It was something sharper, colder. He seemed to know things he shouldn't. Details about our routines, conversations we never had in his presence. It was unsettling, but every time I tried to mention it, my sister brushed it off, saying he was just intense and meant well. He got upset if she didn't reply to his texts fast enough, sometimes sending message after message, each one more demanding than the last. When she finally answered, the tension in his voice was unmistakable. It was like he was tracking her every move, always watching, always waiting. The rest of us felt it too, this invisible pressure settling in the corners of the house. But no one wanted to confront it. Maybe we were in denial, or maybe we thought that was just how some people were. Overbearing, yes, but not dangerous. Looking back, there were signs we missed or chose to ignore. Odd noises at night. His car parked outside for hours after he said he'd left. The way he'd insert himself between us and my sister, controlling who she saw and where she went. The house began to feel smaller, tighter, like it was closing in around us. And yet, no one said anything out loud. It was easier to pretend everything was normal. What we didn't realize was that the house was already being watched, long before we ever noticed. Not just by him, but by the shadows he cast over our lives. The feeling of being observed, measured, controlled wasn't new. It had been there all along, lurking beneath the surface. We just hadn't seen it yet. This was only the beginning. You're here now, inside these walls, silent and unseen. The house breathes around you, every creak and whisper folding into the dark corners no one dares to explore. You might think you've grasped the shape of what's lurking here, but you haven't. Not yet. What you're about to witness isn't a story of jealousy or petty disputes. Those are distractions. Red herrings meant to blind you from the deeper rot. This is something far more insidious, something that thrives on invisibility, on trust twisted into something unrecognizable. From this point forward, every detail you catch, every shadow cast by a flickering light or a hushed footstep, will matter. Don't let your eyes drift away or your mind wander. The truth is not laid bare in the first moments. It waits for you in the final seconds, when the full weight of what has been hidden becomes undeniable. You will feel it then, the shift in the air, the cold certainty that what you believed safe was never truly yours to hold. You are not just an observer. You are a witness to what happens when the walls close in, when the watcher becomes the watched, and the line between predator and prey blurs beyond recognition. If you find yourself drawn deeper, compelled to uncover what lies beneath the surface, then stay. Stay with the story until it unfolds completely, because once the secret reveals itself, it will settle like a shadow in your mind, changing how you see every lock, every closed door, every whispered conversation in your own home. If you feel the gravity pulling you closer, silently mark this place, for it will return to your thoughts again. Subtle gestures, liking this account of what lurks beneath the roof, subscribing to witness what comes next, are ways to keep the truth close, to stay alert to what the darkness hides. But remember, once you cross that boundary, you cannot unsee what you discover. Your sense of safety will never be the same. He arrived almost unnoticed at first, a shadow merging with the rhythms of the house, quietly slipping into the spaces between family members' routines. What began as occasional visits soon transformed into daily appearances, lingering at mealtimes, sitting silently through evening conversations, or standing just beyond the threshold of rooms where the family gathered. He didn't announce his presence. Instead, he embodied a subtle constancy, as if the house itself had accepted him as another fixture. A fixture that observed more than it revealed. His eyes moved with a calm, almost clinical patience. They cataloged, registered, and stored every detail. The way the mother poured coffee precisely at 7:15 a.m., the father's habit of checking his phone 3 times before leaving for work, the sister's nervous tapping when she thought no one was watching. He was never careless or distracted. His gaze lingered, sometimes too long, and his posture was always deliberate. Leaning forward slightly, hands folded or resting on his knees, feet planted firmly but not rigidly. There was a stillness about him that made the air taut, as if silence itself was a language he understood better than words. Conversations that once flowed naturally now felt measured, as if he were gauging each phrase for hidden meanings or testing the boundaries of acceptable topics. His questions came wrapped in concern, but beneath the surface, they probed and prodded. "Did you notice how your father seemed distracted this morning?" He'd ask the sister, voice soft but insistent, eyes narrowing just so. Or, "Are you sure the heating is working properly? You don't want anyone catching a cold," he'd say to the mother, casting a glance around the room that suggested he was more aware of the house's flaws than anyone else. These queries were not mere small talk. They were calculated moves in a quiet, relentless game. He never intruded overtly, never demanded the spotlight, but his presence reshaped the atmosphere. The family's habits shifted subtly, as if his watchful silence was a pressure that bent their natural behaviors. The brother stopped, leaving his room casually, pausing instead to glance toward the living room before heading out. The mother double-checked doors she had always left unlocked. Even the sister, for whom he was ostensibly there, seemed to shrink under his gaze, her laughter less frequent, her smiles more controlled. It became clear that he was not simply a visitor or a boyfriend. He was an analyst, a silent watcher who understood the architecture of the household better than those who had lived there for years. He noticed the creak in the floorboards near the back door, the slight delay in the father's responses when certain topics arose, the peculiar timing of the family dog's barks. Each observation was a piece of a larger puzzle, one only he seemed to be assembling. One evening, as the family gathered in the dim light of the living room, the sister absent momentarily, he rose and moved through the space with an ease that caught attention. Without a word, he opened a cabinet, selected a book misplaced among the dishes, and returned it to its rightful place on the shelf in the hallway. His fingers brushed over the spines as if confirming the accuracy of their order. The mother noticed but said nothing, and the father looked away, discomfort flickering across his face. Later, in the quiet solitude of his own room, the narrator realized something unsettling. The boyfriend's knowledge of the house's layout, quirks, and silent conversations was deeper, more intimate than their own. He knew where the loose floorboard was beneath the staircase, where the emergency exit key was hidden, and even the subtle patterns of light that shifted on the walls at different hours. It was as if the house whispered its secrets to him alone. That moment hung heavy in the air, a quiet revelation that unsettled the foundation of what the family thought they knew about their own home. This was no ordinary guest. He had become part of the house's very fabric, a presence more familiar and enigmatic than anyone dared admit. The boundary between guest and inhabitant blurred, and with it came a growing sense that the house itself was watching back, through him. From the very beginning, her defense of him was unwavering, almost instinctive. Whenever murmurs arose about his sharp gaze or the way he seemed to shadow every move, she was quick to intervene. "He's just protective," she'd say, her voice a shield against any criticism. To her, his intense watchfulness wasn't a warning sign but a badge of care, proof that he valued her safety above all else. She framed his jealousy as a natural response, a sign that he deeply cared, not realizing or refusing to realize that what she called protection was slowly tightening its grip. Her explanations smoothed over every unease that crept into conversations. When a family member mentioned how he questioned her about who she'd been talking to or where she'd been, she shrugged it off. "He just worries. You don't get how much he cares," she'd insist. When he insisted on knowing her daily schedule down to the minute, she brushed it aside as harmless concern. Even when the tone of his voice shifted from gentle to insistent, she found reasons for it. Stress at work, a bad day, or simply his way of showing love. Over time, the family began to second-guess their own feelings, wondering if they were overreacting or misinterpreting his behavior. Her steady minimization of every red flag built a wall that kept doubt firmly planted in their minds. But as days passed, the lines between care and control started to blur and then dissolve altogether. His jealousy was no longer confined to quiet glances or pointed questions. It spilled into constant surveillance. She found herself receiving texts at odd hours, messages asking where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. When she didn't answer immediately, his concern turned into impatience, then frustration. He would show up unannounced, seemingly concerned but unmistakably monitoring. His presence became a shadow that followed her every move, a silent but persistent tether. The emotional control took subtler forms, wrapped in the guise of affection. He insisted on checking in multiple times a day, demanding explanations for cancellations or changes in plans. Once, when a family dinner was rearranged last minute, his reaction was cold and clipped, a stark contrast to the warmth he usually displayed. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he snapped, the edges of his voice sharp and unsettling. His mood soured when routines shifted. If she stayed late with friends or took a different route home, he questioned her motives, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was a need to dictate, to oversee, to control. What disturbed the family most was how she began to accept these intrusions as normal. Her defenses grew stronger, her explanations more elaborate, and the boundary between love and control blurred beyond recognition. They watched helplessly as she rationalized his coldness after a missed call or excused his anger when her phone was left on silent. The warmth of affection she once spoke of seemed to flicker and dim, replaced by a tense, watchful vigilance. The boyfriend's concern felt less like tenderness and more like a calculated grip, an unyielding hold dressed up as care. It wasn't love that lingered in his eyes anymore but control, a need to contain, to monitor, to possess. The family sensed it even if she didn't, a quiet alarm buried beneath her reassurances. The house, too, seemed to grow heavier with his presence, the air thickened by the weight of his watchfulness. In those moments it was clear. What he sought was less her happiness and more her compliance. And the line between protection and possession had long since been crossed. The night had settled over the house like a low, simmering storm. Shadows clung to the corners of each room, and the usual quiet hum of the evening was replaced by a taut stillness that pressed against every wall. It began with a single sharp word, barely audible over the creak of the floorboards, but it quickly escalated into something far more charged. Voices, once calm and measured, now cracked and flared with frustration and resentment, slicing through the thickening silence like knives. The tension was palpable. It wrapped itself tightly around the family, suffocating and inescapable. She tried to steady her breathing, to find the words that would defuse the rising heat, but each attempt only seemed to fan the flames higher. His tone shifted abruptly, the earlier restraint slipping away as anger took root. There was something feral in his voice now, a harshness that startled even those who had long grown accustomed to the undercurrents beneath their interactions. His eyes, once so familiar, seemed to flicker with a volatile energy, a rage barely contained, urgent and wild. The argument spiraled faster, the words more pointed, the accusations sharper. He stood taller, his face flushed, the muscles in his jaw tightening with every heated exchange. The air between them crackled, as if charged with electricity. And then, in a sudden motion that caught everyone off guard, he moved toward the door. His departure was abrupt, reckless almost, as if he were desperate to escape the confines of the house and the weight of the confrontation. He didn't pause to gather his coat or check his phone. There was no lingering glance or whispered apology. Instead, his hands shook slightly as he shoved the door open, the sound echoing sharply down the hallway. His footsteps pounded against the floor, uneven and hurried, a stark contrast to the controlled rhythm he usually maintained. For the first time, he appeared careless, emotionally unmoored, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and raw, unsettled feelings. After the front door slammed shut behind him, the house seemed to inhale deeply, as if trying to regain composure. But the silence that settled was not peaceful. It was heavy, loaded with the residue of what had just passed. The family lingered in the rooms, the absence of his presence more deafening than any noise could have been. It was as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for something to fill the void. She sat down slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The familiar spaces around her felt strange now, suffused with an almost tangible sense of incompletion. Conversations that had been left hanging, words that had been spoken too harshly, emotions that had been unleashed but never resolved. All of it coalesced into a thick fog of uncertainty. The night stretched out before her, long and unyielding, as the feeling settled in that this was far from over. Then, almost as if to mock the silence, a soft creak came from the garage. She rose cautiously, drawn by a sudden impulse, and walked quietly toward the door. Peering through the half-open entrance, her eyes landed on the car. Still parked inside, the door unlocked. It sat there, gleaming faintly under the dim light, a silent testament to the night's abrupt fracture. He had left in a hurry, but he hadn't gone far. The unlocked car was an unspoken invitation, a lingering question mark in the dark. That night marked a shift, an irrevocable fracture in the fragile equilibrium they had all tried to maintain. The house, once a sanctuary, now echoed with the ghosts of unfinished conversations and the weight of unspoken fears. And as the clock ticked quietly in the stillness, the family knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The dim light from the street lamp spilled unevenly across the driveway, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe with every flicker. The car sat there, silent and unassuming, but its unlocked trunk whispered a different story, a story waiting, almost daring someone to listen. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with a tension so dense it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The hesitation wasn't just about the trunk. It was about what opening it might unravel, the fragile boundary between what was known and what was better left buried. Then, slowly, someone stepped forward. Not with confidence, but with a trembling resolve born from too many sleepless nights and too many unanswered questions. Fingers brushed against the cold metal latch, lingering just over it as if the weight of the decision pressed down on them. The silence broke with the faint click of the trunk releasing, a sound that suddenly felt as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. The lid creaked open, and at first, the darkness inside resisted the light, swallowing the beam from the flashlight. But as the glow finally settled, the first object emerged. A faded, blood-stained cloth, folded too carefully, too deliberately. There was something unnatural about it, the way it absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It was a silent scream, a relic of a violence that had been hidden away with chilling precision. The cloth felt wrong, like a wound left to fester in the dark, impossible to ignore. Beneath it, a worn leather-bound notebook appeared, its cover cracked and creased, pages yellowed with age and use. But the real disturbance wasn't the notebook itself. It was the scrawled handwriting inside, frantic and disjointed, filled with names and dates that seemed to map a twisted timeline. Some of those dates aligned eerily with events whispered about in the neighborhood, disappearances and strange sightings that everyone tried not to acknowledge. The notebook was a ledger of secrets, a record not of jealousy or petty grievances, but of something far more deliberate, far more calculated. Next came a small, rusted box, locked tight, its surface scarred with deep gouges as if someone had tried and failed to pry it open. The box exuded an aura of menace, as if it contained something too terrible to be released. It was an object that felt not just out of place, but alive with the weight of unspoken horrors. It connected in some inexplicable way to the recent news, the untraceable whispers of things gone missing, people vanishing without a trace. The box was a silent witness, a sealed confession. Finally, tucked into a corner, was a set of keys, old, tarnished, yet unmistakably familiar. They didn't fit the house or the car, but their presence hinted at hidden spaces, secret compartments, places where truths could be concealed from even the closest eyes. The keys were a chilling reminder that the facade of normalcy had been meticulously maintained, that beneath the surface lay a labyrinth of concealment. Each item in the trunk was a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture they had been told to believe. They were not tokens of jealousy or petty rivalry. They were fragments of a larger, darker design crafted to hide something far worse. The realization settled heavily in the room. This was not about love lost or grudges held. It was about concealment, about burying the unspeakable beneath layers of silence and shadows, about a desperate attempt to keep the truth locked away, even from those who thought they lived under the same roof. As the days passed, the family began to notice patterns, subtle at first, then glaringly obvious, that connected the unsettling fragments scattered throughout their lives. News reports on the television, once background noise, suddenly took on a chilling new significance. Headlines about missing persons, unexplained disappearances, and strange occurrences in nearby towns no longer seemed coincidental. The locations mentioned in these stories often overlapped with places he had visited or spoken about casually, almost too casually, as if he were weaving his presence into the fabric of these events. A timeline emerged from the chaos, pieced together from overheard conversations, glimpses of his phone screen, and the faintest hints of movement. Dates matched suspicious absences and unexplained errands. The family's collective unease grew as they realized these were not isolated incidents but part of a calculated sequence of actions designed to evade detection. Every time the police or investigators appeared on the news, he was always one step ahead. Already gone, already covering tracks, already manipulating the narrative from within their very home. Inside the house, his behavior, once dismissed as eccentric or controlling, began to make horrifying sense. The way he monitored phone calls, intercepted letters, and subtly steered conversations wasn't just about keeping peace or maintaining order. It was about controlling the flow of information, about ensuring that no one could piece together the truth without his knowledge. His insistence on proximity, always being physically close, was a strategy to watch, to listen, to stay ahead of suspicion. Every glance, every movement was calculated to maintain dominance over the family's understanding of reality. This control extended beyond mere observation. The family noticed how he manipulated their perceptions, sowing doubt and confusion to keep them fragmented and distracted. It was clear now that he had deliberately inserted himself into their lives not just as a member of the household, but as the gatekeeper of truth, deciding what they saw, what they heard, what they believed. The realization was suffocating. They had been pawns in a larger game, their trust weaponized to mask something far darker. As the pieces fell into place, a haunting question emerged. Why this family? Why had he chosen them out of all the people he could have involved? The answer lay hidden in the shadows of his past, entwined with their own histories in ways they had never imagined. The next revelations would expose the unsettling reasons behind his selection, shedding light on motives that were as personal as they were sinister. For those following this story, it's crucial to stay with us until the end. What comes next will unravel the mystery of his choice, the chilling truth that binds him to this family and explains the depths of his manipulation. By the time the final thread was tugged, the family faced an undeniable truth. They had been manipulated for months, their lives orchestrated as part of a cruel and intricate design. The trust they once held had been exploited, leaving them to grapple with a betrayal that cut deeper than any words could express. Under the same roof, they had lived alongside a carefully constructed facade, unaware that the real story was being written in silence and shadows, far beyond their reach until now. His control had seeped far beyond the sisters' immediate world, quietly tightening its grip on everyone under the same roof. It wasn't just about managing her days or dictating her actions. He had meticulously expanded his influence to shape the entire household's rhythm, bending schedules and decisions to suit his own concealed agenda. The family's routines, once fluid and spontaneous, had been subtly replaced by a rigid structure, one that none of them had consciously agreed to but all had come to follow without question. He was the unseen architect of their days, deciding when meals were served, when lights were turned off, and even when conversations could take place. The subtlety of his control was its greatest weapon. He discouraged visits from friends and relatives, often feigning vague reasons: too busy, too tired, or simply too inconvenient. Invitations were ignored or postponed indefinitely. Over time, visitors stopped coming altogether, and the house grew quieter, more insular. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, a slow constriction that no one noticed until it was nearly complete. Monitoring movements became second nature, disguised as concern or routine check-ins. A casual question about where someone was going or when they'd return was a tool for surveillance, ensuring no one strayed beyond the invisible perimeter he had drawn. Phones were subtly monitored, messages intercepted or erased, and personal freedoms chipped away under the guise of keeping the family safe. The home, once a sanctuary, transformed into a controlled environment where every step was watched, every word weighed. Isolation was the final, cruel stroke. By the time anyone realized they were cut off from the outside world, the emotional and psychological walls were already firmly in place. It wasn't just physical confinement. It was a deliberate severing of bonds, leaving each family member feeling alone even in shared spaces. Fear replaced comfort without fanfare or dramatic confrontation. It crept in slowly, like a shadow at dusk, unnoticed in its early stages. The laughter that once filled the rooms was replaced by silence and hesitant glances. The warmth of familiarity turned cold, replaced by a pervasive tension that no one dared to name aloud. This transformation was so gradual that no one could pinpoint exactly when the home stopped being a refuge and started feeling like a prison. The shift was imperceptible because it was built on trust and routine, two things he had skillfully manipulated. His presence was constant but invisible, a looming figure whose control was felt rather than seen. The family adapted, not out of submission but out of a deep-seated, unspoken fear that any deviation might trigger consequences they couldn't predict. Then came the chilling realization that shattered any remaining illusion. The house itself was not merely a backdrop for his control but an integral part of his cover. Every locked door, every shadowed hallway, every seemingly innocuous rule was carefully designed to maintain the facade. The structure that had once symbolized safety was, in truth, a meticulously engineered cage. It wasn't just where they lived. It was where his control was anchored and concealed from the outside world. Understanding this was like waking from a nightmare only to find the nightmare was still unfolding in daylight. The house, with all its rooms and secrets, was a stage set for deception, a physical manifestation of his dominance. It wasn't just about controlling people anymore. It was about controlling perceptions, about hiding the truth behind walls thick with silence and fear. The family's captivity was not only emotional or psychological but spatial. They were trapped not only by his will but by the very home they had once called safe. The decision to involve authorities was anything but straightforward. A deep, gnawing hesitation settled in, born from the fear of being wrong. What if the evidence was misinterpreted? What if the suspicions turned out to be baseless, shattering lives and reputations unnecessarily? That hesitation was a heavy weight, pressing on every thought, every whispered conversation. Yet, opposing that doubt was a far more intense, relentless fear, that of being right. The chilling reality that what was discovered could be true carried with it a burden almost too great to bear. The silence in the house, the oppressive atmosphere, the locked doors and hidden spaces, all pointed toward a truth too monstrous to ignore. The conflict was internal and profound, the paralysis of uncertainty versus the urgency of justice. When the authorities finally arrived, their demeanor was professional, cautious, as they were briefed on the situation. The initial moments were clinical, methodical, searching, observing, cataloging. But everything shifted the instant the trunk was opened. What lay inside was unlike anything they had expected. The air in the room thickened, eyes widened, faces drained of color. The investigators' reactions spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. The subtle change, the narrowing of eyes, the tightening of jaws, the stiffening posture, traced a clear line from disbelief to grim acceptance. There was no immediate outburst or dramatic display, but the transformation was unmistakable. Skepticism had given way to the undeniable truth. As the team methodically processed the scene, their focus sharpened. The pieces began to align, each finding reinforcing the next. They worked silently but with an urgency that betrayed their growing certainty. The initial veneer of detachment cracked, revealing the weight of what they were confronting. The officers exchanged guarded glances, the kind that acknowledged the gravity of what they were uncovering. The subtle shift in their behavior, from tentative inquiry to determined resolve, marked the turning point. The room, once filled with the possibility of innocence, now bore the heavy certainty of guilt. Further investigation quickly connected the boyfriend to more than just this isolated incident. Databases flagged his involvement in several similar cases, patterns emerging from the shadows. The realization settled quietly but firmly among the officers. This was not an aberration but part of a broader, disturbing narrative. Each new link added layers to the story, transforming it from a solitary tragedy into a chilling series of calculated acts. The boyfriend, once just a figure behind closed doors, was now exposed as a thread connecting multiple missing persons and unsolved cases. This understanding brought a sobering clarity. What had begun as a fragile hope for resolution became a stark confrontation with a harsh reality. The silence that had once protected secrets was shattered, replaced by the relentless pursuit of truth and justice. The house no longer stood as a fortress of control, but as a grim reminder of the lives affected by the shadow lurking beneath its roof. The authorities' resolve solidified, and the journey toward uncovering the full extent of the darkness hidden within these walls had only just begun. The house felt unbearably quiet after he was gone. The absence wasn't just physical. It was a hollow that echoed through every room, every corner, every creaking floorboard. Where laughter or even tense conversation had once filled the space, now there was only a heavy stillness that pressed down, making the air thick and hard to breathe. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something that would never come. The silence didn't comfort. It unsettled, reminding everyone that what had lived there had left behind more than memories. It left behind scars that weren't visible but deeply felt. Guilt settled in like a shadow that refused to lift. It wasn't just about what had happened, but about what had been missed, ignored, or dismissed. How had none of them seen the signs? How could they have shared a home with someone so dangerous without sensing the storm brewing beneath the surface? The questions circled endlessly in the mind, relentless and unforgiving. There were moments when the memories replayed with a cruel clarity. Snatches of conversation, fleeting expressions, small details that now seemed charged with terrible meaning. The weight of hindsight was crushing, and no amount of self-reassurance could quiet the gnawing feeling that they had somehow failed. Fear took root in unexpected places. It wasn't just fear of what had been done, but fear of what might have been, fear of what could still be lurking just out of sight. The familiar spaces that had once felt safe now felt alien and unpredictable. Every creak in the night, every shadow cast by the moonlight, sparked a flicker of anxiety. The mind became hyper-aware, scanning for threats that might never come but that felt all too real. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless hours spent staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. The idea of safety became fragile, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a shelf. Slowly, a painful realization set in. Danger had lived under the same roof. It wasn't an abstract concept anymore, but a concrete truth that reshaped everything. The home, once a sanctuary, had been infiltrated by something dark and unknowable. Trust fractured, not just toward the person who had left but toward the very idea of home itself. The spaces where they had dreamed, laughed, and planned now carried the weight of betrayal. Familiar rooms felt tainted, even though they had done nothing wrong. The past and present collided, making it impossible to separate what had been from what was now. There were moments when the mind tried to reach for normalcy, trying to believe that life could resume, that the silence might one day be replaced by genuine peace. But those moments were fleeting, always interrupted by the persistent unease that clung to the edges of every thought. The once comforting routines now felt hollow, as if going through the motions might somehow erase the invisible wounds. Yet, the reality was stubborn and unyielding. The world inside those walls had been altered forever. Even now, long after he was gone, the mind drifts back to those days, searching for answers in the fragments left behind. Faces, words, gestures, they all become part of a relentless mental replay. Was there a glance that had revealed something hidden? A phrase that was more than it seemed? The search for signs missed is endless, a quiet obsession that offers no relief. It is a way to try and make sense of the senseless, to find order in chaos. But the answers remain elusive, buried beneath layers of memory and silence. In the stillness of the night, when the world is quiet and the mind is free to wander, those moments return unbidden. They come not as comfort, but as reminders that the past is never truly gone. The house may stand empty, but the echoes of what lived under its roof continue to resonate, shaping every thought and every breath. And so, the search goes on, an unspoken acknowledgement that some shadows never fully fade. What we must grasp is that the boyfriend's demeanor was never about raw intensity or reckless passion. Instead, it was a calculated, strategic presence, one that thrived in the quiet spaces, weaving itself seamlessly into the family's daily life. His actions, subtle and deliberate, were designed to avoid suspicion, to keep the truth carefully hidden beneath layers of normalcy. This was not a story of overt confrontation or explosive drama. It was a chilling testament to how danger can masquerade as affection, how control can be exercised through patience and precision rather than force. The tension that gripped the household was not born from loud arguments or visible fights, but from the unseen threads of manipulation and quiet dominance. It was a slow, insidious erosion of trust and safety, masked by smiles and routine, that almost went unnoticed until it was almost too late. This was a masterclass in concealment, a reminder that the most threatening forces are often those that blend effortlessly into the fabric of everyday life, hiding under the same roof where love and vulnerability should have been sanctuary. It's a sobering reflection on how easily appearances deceive, how the walls that shelter us can also imprison us when those we welcome in harbor intentions that are anything but benign. The family came perilously close to never uncovering the truth, to remaining forever trapped in a facade that protected the predator rather than the prey. The line between safety and peril was razor thin, and the difference was a matter of moments, intuition, and courage that emerged just in time. As the echoes of the past linger in the empty rooms, they serve as a haunting reminder. Danger is most terrifying when it hides in plain sight, nestled within the everyday, under the same roof we call home. It compels us to question, to look deeper, and to never take comfort in surface appearances alone. If this story has moved you, if you believe that vigilance and awareness are vital in recognizing threats cloaked in familiarity, then join the conversation. Subscribe to stay connected with stories that reveal the hidden truths lurking just beneath the surface. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever sensed that something was wrong where everything seemed normal? And most importantly, share this story with others, because sometimes the greatest protection comes from shedding light on the shadows that live right alongside us.